Thank you. Thank you very much for coming to this session, and good morning, everyone. My name is Elisa. I am an academic researcher at King's College, and today I have the pleasure to introduce you this group of enthusiastic recent graduates at King's College London. So I taught this group a quantitative method for 2 semesters. And I was looking for interesting ways for them to learn data analysis, but also to familiarize with the fascinating world of software security. So we had the chance to partner with one of the leading company in the sector that you might know, Veracode, who was kind enough to give us their data on software vulnerabilities found by their platform in their customers' applications. And so today we are going to present the results of this analysis on pattern, trends, and practices in software security. And we are very happy to have the chance to present the results of this analysis here at B-Side London. And this was also an example of academia-industry collaboration that we hope to inspire that there are many more. So without further ado, I leave you to this very exciting group.
So, hello everyone. I'll start you off with a brief description of the setting and the data we analyzed. So imagine you're the CISO of a company and your goal is to have a secure application, to enforce regulations, and to enforce your own requirements about the application through a security policy. You can think of the security policy as the types of flaws which are not allowed to be found in an application. Your team of developers will then upload the application to be scanned for flaws in the cloud environment that is offered by Veracode. Veracode will generate a report, and on the report you will be able to see a list of the applications, of the flaws, the flaw types, as well as a severity score for each flaw, and whether or not it breaks the security policy that you have set. Then, as the CISO and with your team of developers, you are able to decide whether or not to fix a flaw or not. Later we will see how different flaws can be addressed. Afterwards, you can also upload the application and have it scanned again, and the cycle repeats.
So before we start with the analysis, here we have a quick summary of the data set we worked with. So we had available data that covered 2,587 customers across 24 distinct industries over the period of 1st of January 2019 to 24th of January 2022. 95% of these customers performed scans during the period, and we had more than 4 million scans and 147,000 applications. And this data comes from one single vendor, but as we're going to see, it is quite comprehensive as a data set. It covers many flaw types, industry sectors, and so on. And we mainly focus on detecting patterns over time and differences across different industries. And to give you a quick look of how comprehensive the data set is, you can see 2 histograms of the number of customers by industries and the number of applications by industries.
Okay, so to begin with, we present 2 different ways of understanding variation in behavior across industries, which are denoted by the colorful bars as you have seen. So first up, we looked at the mean number of scans per application for applications with at least 1 scan. This is calculated by taking the mean number of scans per application divided by the total number of applications in each given industry. So in this graph, the black lines denote the 95% confidence intervals, which denote the precision of the estimate. Industries with more data have a smaller confidence interval, and therefore the estimates are more precise. What we see here is a large variation in data. So on the left-hand side of the graph, you see the industries manufacturing, travel, recreation and leisure, retail and government, which are industries that scan more often. The median is also depicted by the dotted lines, which we have plotted to detect specific outliers in our data. The median also shows a generally decreasing trend from left to right. The second way of analyzing industry variation in scanning patterns is looking at how regularly scans take place. We measure this by scan cadence, which is the average number of days in between scans. This shows whether scans are spaced regularly across time, which would give, for instance, different security implications. As you can see on the graph, industries on the left scan less regularly and industries on the right scan more regularly, since the y-axis is the mean number of days in between scans. Just like the previous graph, the median and the 95% confidence intervals are plotted as well. As you can see, a large number of industries show average time in between scans of 5 to 15 days, as depicted by the middle portion of the graph. The overall average time between scans across all industries is 12.14 days. This may be related to the increasing use of the agile methodology. So the two measures are actually correlated. We found that industries that scan more frequently also tend to scan more regularly, as what we would expect. This is seen by the industries on the right-hand side of this graph corresponding to those on the left-hand side of the previous graph. These include retail, government, and travel, recreation, and leisure.
Next, we decided to look at the behavior of scans across time. We were particularly interested in cyclicality, that is how the number of scans vary throughout the year. We were also very interested in how scan behavior changed after important dates. Firstly, we decided to normalize the amount of scans by the amount of customers, so we could see if this increase in scans was either due to people scanning more or an increase in the number of customers in Vericode's customer base. Even though we noticed an increase of customers throughout time at a regular speed, we saw that the increase in the amount of scans per customer was bigger than the trend in the increase of number of customers. We also noted that there was quite a lot of cyclicality, especially in December, as you can see, drops every year. This is probably due to a fewer amount of scans as people go home over the holidays. We also noticed a big increase in the year of 2021, breaking the trend. Particularly when we focus on 2021, we noticed that there was a very big spike after the Log4Shell incident. To give you an idea of how big this spike was, it was an increase in around of 5 scans per existing customer. Before that, the max increase in the same amount of weeks was only 3.5 amount of scans per customer. So it was a very big spike indeed. Passing the word over to Janina.
Perfect. So next we were interested in which vulnerabilities are most common across industries. And what we can see from the graph is that the most frequent vulnerabilities are cross-site scripting, CRLF injection, and information leakage. And this was a calculation where we were very concerned about the representativeness of our data. Because we only have Veracode customers, we decided to normalize the numbers. So we have this little calculation on the right-hand side where we divided the number of flaws in an industry by the number of applications in that industry. So when you look at the numbers on the bars, that is the average number of that flaw in the specific industry. So looking at the 52 of cross-site scripting flaws in retail and hospitality, that means on average there can be 52 flaws cross-site scripting in retail and hospitality. However, twice as many can be seen in the technology sector, so on average 109 per application. Looking at general patterns, we can see that the technology industry experiences the highest number of flaws per application across the three most frequent flaws. So they have a lot of cross-site scripting, flaws per application, also CRLF injection and information leakage problems. And interestingly, the government also has problems with cross-site scripting. They have on average 89 flaws per application, however, less on CRLF injection and information leakage. And next, we were then interested in going into which industries have the most severe flaws. And to do that, we calculated a regression where the outcome variable is the number of severe flaws, and the whole calculation was based on the application level again. What we can see is that in the red box, you can see the coefficients for the different industries. So we can see that in general, there is a trend of increasing numbers of severe flaws within that red box. Especially software and internet industry have a high number of flaws. And just to tell you how exactly that was calculated, we decided to compare everything to the baseline financial services. So the numbers you can see is, for example, software and internet. In 2019, they had on average 122 flaws more per application than the financial services industry. What's also interesting, we controlled for other factors that could potentially influence the number of severe flaws, such as business criticality or whether the customer requested a consultation, customer age, and also the programming language. And interestingly, the criticality of the application had no significant effects on the number of severe flaws. One might expect that more business critical applications are actually more secure. However, that doesn't seem to be the case. In terms of the programming languages, we can see a very high variation. However, we didn't go more in detail on that. However, in the next step, we were more concerned about industry maturity in general. So which industries are most software security mature or least software security mature, and also what really drives that maturity. So again, we did a regression and to really determine which industries software security mature, so kind of optimize their way of detecting flaws. We have a binary classification. So we distinguish between clients who have an API account, so who scan automatically, versus clients who have a manual account. So we assume those who scan automatically are more mature. And the binary classification also takes into account other variables that could potentially affect the maturity, such as time variation, the application's age, also having requested a consultation, business criticality, and again, the programming language. What we can see when we look at the numbers, the industries with positive coefficients, especially the ones in the upper green box, are most strongly correlated with having an API account. So government, travel, recreation and leisure, education, retail and financial services seem to be more software secure, mature in that sense. And however, on the other hand, those industries with a negative coefficient, such as telecommunications, wholesale distribution, federal government and partner companies of Veracode, seem to be less correlated with having an API account, so least software security mature. Looking at the control variables, interestingly, we see a positive time trend. So over the years, we see increasing software security maturity. Approximately, there is an increase in API account use of 1% in 12 months. However, the application's age, having requested a consultation with an expert, or the business criticality don't influence how mature you are. Again, interestingly, programming language again has an impact on the maturity or how optimized you are in terms of scanning and software security maturity. However, those effects really varied. Sometimes they predicted less or more API accounts. With that, I now hand over to Alan.
Hi. Next up, we look into which flaws get fixed and what drives the decision to fix them. And we use two logistic regression models here. In the first model, we have modification in the code such that the outcome variable equals 1 if the flaw is fixed, and the outcome variable equals 0 if the flaw is left unresolved. We look into a number of independent variables that we believe are key drivers to the decision of whether or not to fixing the flaws. One intuitive driver we may look at is the flaw severity. In the coefficient column, this tells us whether a flaw with a certain severity level is more or less likely to get fixed relative to our control group, the flaws with informational severity level. And if the coefficient is positive, the flaw is more likely to get fixed. If it's negative, the flaw is less likely to get fixed. Here, all the coefficients are positive, so we could say that all level of severity increase the likelihood of a flaw getting fixed. This is quite intuitive, but as you may see, the higher severity level doesn't mean it's the one the most likely to get fixed. And this may be because of the difficulties in fixing the flaws, which we do not observe here in the data. And in the second panel, we consider flaws in application that we see as business critical. And for medium business criticality and above, the flaws are most likely to get fixed. The coefficient is both large in magnitude and statistically significant. Another key variable we look into is the number of scan types. This is an indicator ranging from 1 to 4, indicating whether indicating the number of times the number of different scan types an application has been scanned. This includes dynamic analysis, static analysis, SCA, and penetration testing. Here again, the higher the number of different scan types, the more likely the flaw gets fixed. In the second model, we have modification in the code such that the outcome variable equals 1 if the flaw is fixed or mitigated in some other ways, and equals 0 if it's left unresolved. Here you can see the coefficient is really similar to the previous model, except for this very high severity level. And in the very high severity level, the coefficient is larger in magnitude and becomes statistically significant. We interpret this result as the very high severity flaw is more likely to be mitigated rather than fixed. And this explains why the very high severity flaws becomes large and significant only in the second model.
So next we ask the question how quickly the flaws get fixed. And we answer by looking at the time it takes to fix 50% of all flaws by industry, what is also known as the flaw's half-life. And we start by calculating the lifetime, also called the duration of flaws in days, from the moment they are first found to the moment when they are resolved. And we find the half-life by industry. We can see that the average time it took for 50% of all flaws to be fixed across industries was 121 days, but you can also see that the inter-industry variation was also very large. Agriculture and mining, which was the fastest industry, had the half-life of just 29 days, whereas consumer services took 341 days to fix half of all flaws found in the applications. To illustrate the scale of the difference between the slowest and fastest industries, we have also plotted the proportion of unresolved flaws over time. And you can see, for example, that after 20 months in agriculture and mining, almost no flaw remains, whereas even after 30 months in consumer services, almost a quarter of flaws remain. And we will later show that this is in part because of the different nature of flaws that are faced by different industries.
Next, we ask whether specific industries get faster at fixing flaws over time. And to do this, we compute the number of days that it takes to fix 50% of the flaws arising in each year for those industries. And we do this for each industry and then on the entire sample. And that is, if I explain to you the columns here in the table, if you look at 2019, What this says is that 2019 refers to the number of days that it took to fix 50% of the flaws found in the year 2019. 2020 refers to the number of days that it took to fix 50% of the flaws found in 2020, and so on. If we take total as an example, that is all the industries pulled together, we could see that it took 94 days to fix 50% of the flaws found in 2019, 141 to fix 50% of the flaws found in 2020, and 80 days to fix 50% of the flaws found in 2021. Overall, the pattern here is not that easy to summarize. It's quite heterogeneous. Some industries get faster over time, some get slower, and some have jumps like the total. But there is a few industries that caught our attention, which I've just highlighted in green now. If you look at the bottom right corner, you can see that real estate and healthcare are two industries that actually get much faster at fixing flaws over time. For example, real estate goes from over 500 days to fix 50% of the flaws to only 12 days in 2021. And some other industries show a inverse pattern, such as consumer services, which actually gets slower at fixing flaws over time. We should keep in mind here that those are unconditional estimates, which means that we're not controlling for anything, and these are only suggestive. And if we wanted to learn more, we would have to enter a parametric model, which is a model that takes into account all those other factors at the same time and controls for them, which we will do over the next few slides.
Yes, so we just saw that there is quite some variation in flaw fixing times, both over time and across industries. So the next step is to ask, why is that? And to do that, we estimated a parametric survival model. The outcome we want to explain with our model is the lifetime in days of each flaw from the time it is first detected in a scan to the time it is resolved. And at first, we estimate this model pooled with all the data over all 3 years and across all industries. And we estimate the influence of 4 variables of interest on the time it takes to fix a flaw. First, we look at whether that kind of flaw is permitted to go unaddressed under that respective business's security policy, or whether there is a requirement to address that kind of flaw. Second, we look at how severe the flaw is. Third, how critical the application is for that developer. And lastly, how old the application is. And we also control for a couple of more variables. First, whether the business requested an expert consultation from Veracode about that application, how long they've been using this scanning service. Third, which programming language is primarily used in the application. And finally, whether the application was submitted only for, say, a static analysis or for multiple types of scan and also software composition analysis and manual penetration testing, for example. So one way to compare the effect of these variables on flaw fixing time is to look at hazard ratios, a relative measure of how quickly flaws are fixed. So a hazard ratio of 1 would mean that the variable we're looking at is not associated with the outcome. A hazard ratio of greater than 1 would mean that flaws with that characteristic tend to be fixed faster than those without, and a hazard ratio of less than 1 would mean slower flaw fixing. So here we can see the results of that first model. The perhaps most clear pattern is here actually whether a flaw is allowed under the business's security policy or not. We can see, if you look at the very top bar in the figure, that such flaws that aren't required to actually be addressed are fixed about 1/3 slower than any other flaws that are required to be addressed. With regard to severity, we would have maybe expected to see some kind of clear pattern that potentially the very severe flaws would be addressed with the greatest urgency. However, the pattern is not actually as clear as one might expect. What we can say is that very little severe flaws are fixed about 30% slower than 20% slower than those with medium severity, but there is no significant difference between the time it takes to fix medium, high, or very high severity flaws. An application's age does not seem to have a significant impact on the time it takes to fix flaws in that application, but business criticality is again a pattern that fits well with the intuition. The more critical an application is for the business, the faster flaws in it get fixed. We can see that very low criticality applications are resolved. The flaws in those are resolved about 30% slower than medium severity, medium criticality applications. Yes.
And now that we've seen what a parametric model is, and now that you understand a little bit more about hazard ratios, which are the coefficients here again, we're gonna do it. We're gonna run the same model, but for the flaws arising in each year for only 2 industries. The 2 industries that you see here are actually the 2 industries we identified earlier: real estate and healthcare. We identified as 2 industries that got faster at fixing flaws over time, and we're going to dive a little bit closer into what may drive this pattern of them getting faster over time. And if you look closely here at the customer tenure, it appears that customers that have been with Veracode for longer actually get, with time, get to fix flaws faster. I'm going to walk you through how to interpret the coefficients here. So the first coefficient in 2019, 0.749, can be rounded up to 0.75, which means that the flaws found in 2019 are 25% less likely to be fixed because of the tenure of the customer. But if you move to 2021, that coefficient actually becomes above 1, which means now 1.1 means that there's a 10% more likely chance that the flaws get fixed with customers of that customer tenure. So with time, customers actually get faster at fixing flaws. If we now look at the severity of the flaws, there's an interesting pattern here, which is that in 2019, relatively low severity flaws actually are fixed slower relative to medium severity flaws. But these results become insignificant in 2020 and 2021, which means that there's no effect because you can see that the stars are gone from the coefficients. And you see the inverse pattern for relatively high severe flaws, which are insignificant to affect flaw fixing rates in 2019, but actually significant in 2020 and 2021, reducing the likelihood of a flaw being fixed then by as much as 60%. If you now move on to healthcare, we can actually see that customer tenure in green again coincides with the early observations we made for real estate, which is that with time, customer tenure actually increases the likelihood that a flaw is fixed. As you can see, we move from a coefficient below 1 in 2019 to a coefficient above 1 in 2021, which can be attributed for 2021 as an increase in the likelihood of a flaw being fixed in that year of 16% if we round it up. And then let's now look at business criticality in the case of healthcare. What is interesting here is that flaws which are associated with relatively high critical application for business are more likely to be fixed in all years. And as a comparison, we can compare very low and very high business criticality flaws. And you can see that that flaws that are associated with very low business criticality have the lowest have some of the lowest hazard ratios, reducing the flaw the likelihood that a flaw is fixed in 2020 by as much as 78%. And if you move to the very high business criticality flaws at the last line of that square, red square, you can see that you have the opposite with very high flaws associated with very high business criticality are sped up by as much as 75% in 2019 and 100% in 2020. We can now conclude on everything we've seen today. We've understood that scans have increased over time, and particularly so in 2021. We've observed some cyclicality around the December period. We've also seen that some shocks in the system are seen throughout the number of scans done, such as the log4 shelf law becoming public. There's also a high variability of behavior across industries, whether that is in terms of scan frequency, scan cadence, software security maturity, and the time that it takes to fix 50% of the flaws, and those can range from 29 days to 341. And we've also seen with the last part of our analysis that some industries get actually faster at fixing flaws over time, and some get slower, such as consumer services. And this rate of flaw fixing is actually sped up by the fact that this flaw is not allowed under the client's policy, the business criticality of the application the flaw is in, and most importantly, the customer tenure with Veracode. And thank you for having us and listening. And we're happy to answer any questions you may have at this point.
So can I ask a question, please?
Yeah, of course.
So you've had the shocks for the system there of Log4j. Have you been able to look at any examples of, say, releases in, say, Android version or iOS version or other operating system versions over that time?
As far as I know, we didn't consider those.
Okay.
Just because we had limited time and efforts.
It's another research question. There you go.
Yeah, no, of course.
Let me pass this around. Thank you.
Hello. You mentioned business criticality as like one of the aspects that you're having into consideration. How do you measure business criticality for the?
I think so. That's like in the data set that was given to us by Veracode. They have actually a very detailed explanation and codebook for each variable, and they have coded for a business criticality on like 4 points, which I imagine they didn't say, but I imagine that would be as a feedback from the customer that would say what is considered for them an important app and what is not. You know, when you register on a website, or like when they register their account, I imagine they have to say how important that app is to their business.
For the sectors that you saw big changes in, either positive or negative, do you know from Veracode how many customers they had in that sector? Could it just be one or two people getting their act together?
Yeah. Are you talking about the time they took to fix? Which one are you referring to?
The one where you had
this?
There was one where you showed in different sectors, and they were like one of the sectors got much better, one of the sectors got much worse in terms of the amount.
So healthcare and real estate were getting better, and consumer services was getting slower, right? So I think, from what I remember, there's about 4 and 5%. So real estate and healthcare represent about 4 and 5% of the customers of Veracode each. So in total, about 10%. So there's actually quite a lot of observations. If you move to this table here, you can see at the bottom of the table that you have the number of observations for each year. So you have minimum 200,000 observations for that year. So it would suggest that it's quite accurate.
For fixing flaws, do we know the data set? Is it data that the flaws, have they potentially been ignored and that's what's considered as fixed? Or is it actually fixed? What does that data set include?
So we interpreted flaws that are deliberately left unfixed, that where the customer said we don't want to fix this as resolved. But so in the survival analysis, we treated them as resolved. While, for example, So we do have a lot. We do know whether a flaw was addressed or not. In the case where the flaw wasn't fixed in the code, it might have been mitigated through other ways by the customer. The customer said they have taken appropriate measures so that it's not that bad. So, for example, in this model, we consider that separately, whether a flaw was actually fixed in the code or mitigated. Or a customer could also register that flaw as we just accept the risk of that flaw and we don't do anything about it. But that is a separate category from just left unresolved.
So basically that information is not part of here? Or is that also included part of this whole data set?
So in those that where the customer said we are not going to do anything about it, those would be treated as resolved in our data set.
Okay, cool.
And those where we don't know anything would be treated as left unfixed.
So I have a question regarding the particular customers of Veracode, and potentially this information is missing from your data set, but do you have an understanding of if these applications were used with high volumes of users, or if these were perhaps even like just minor applications that have slightly polluted your data set there? That's a bit of a loaded question, I apologize, but...
Look, we don't have any data on how they're used or who they are used by, just how critical they are for the business and yeah.
Well, don't think we have any more questions, so if you'd just like to join me in thanking them all again, thank you very much for your talk, Thank you.